first sweeping changes to our tax system in decades. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Happening Now. I'm Julie Banduras.
Hi, Julie. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm Eric Shawn. Well, lawmakers in the House yesterday passing their version of tax reform. The vote was 227 to 205. But you know, not all Republicans were on board. 13 Republicans giving it a no vote. Many of them in high-tax states. They're objecting to the dumping of the state and local tax deductions. Well, now the Senate taking the first step on its version of the bill, with the Finance Committee approving it last night. Speaker Paul Ryan is confident that the House and the Senate, he says, will get this through by the end of the year. That is a goal, of course, shared by the White House.
But in order to turn this momentum into sustained economic growth, you all know there's one policy that's more important than anything else. And I'm here to promise you, President Trump and I are going to be fighting every day to pass the largest tax cut in American history. And we're going to do it this year.
And Chief Washington correspondent John Roberts is live at the White House, where the president is receiving his daily intelligence briefing right now. Good morning, John.
Eric, good morning to you. The president clearly happy with the passage of his signature legislative initiative, tax reform, at least in the House. The president tweeting out this morning, quote, "Great numbers on stocks and the economy. If we get tax cuts and reform, we'll really see some great results." The president invested a lot of political capital in getting tax reform through the House. The White House really taking a lead here in pushing it through. Unlike with Obamacare, the president, as you see there in those pictures, going up to Capitol Hill yesterday for a final cheerleading session. The House Majority Whip Steve Scalise saying just this morning that the president's involvement really made a difference. Listen here.
When we rolled the bill out just a few weeks ago, President Trump invited us down to the White House to be with him and said he supports this 100%, and his help has been incredibly important in us getting the bill through the House. And so he's all in on getting the economy moving again. This bill does that, so it was great to see him in the House.
The president also taking aim at the strictly partisan nature of the bill. As you pointed out, it was 227 to 205. 13 Republicans did vote against the bill. But the president tweeting out this morning that he thinks the Democrats missed a big opportunity, saying, quote, "If Democrats were not such obstructionists and understood the power of lower taxes, we would be able to get many of their ideas into the bill." One area where the president is still getting some resistance on is the elimination of state and local tax deductions. Some tax analyses have found that middle income earners in some states may end up paying more in taxes. This morning, the Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin acknowledging that some people will pay higher taxes, though he says it's only the very, very wealthy, and that there is an overall benefit in high tax states by cutting the corporate rate. Listen here.
The people's taxes who are going to go up are the rich people in high-tax states. But again, there's a lot of benefit to the New York economy of lowering the corporate rate to 20%. That's a huge boom for the financial services industry.
The president's attention turns toward the Senate. You mentioned that it passed out of the Finance Committee, now goes before the full Senate. But again, the president has got some problems with Republicans, much in the same way he did with Obamacare. Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson saying that he cannot support the bill in its current form, but he does want to fix it so he can support it. Senators Bob Corker of Tennessee, McCain and Flake of Arizona all have problems with the fact that they believe that it adds to the deficit. Also sitting on the fence, Senator Susan Collins of Maine and Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. The president in the Senate can only afford to lose 2 votes. That'll take him down to 50, plus a tiebreaker of Vice President Mike Pence. If the president again gets this piece of legislation through the House, as he did with Obamacare, only to see it fail in the Senate, Eric, the president will not be very happy about that, I can tell you now.
All right, John. Well, certainly the deadline's looming and the clock is ticking. They got their work to do. Thanks so much. Julie?
All right. Well, the passage of a tax reform bill in the House now setting up a huge showdown in the Senate. Some GOP senators still on the fence. The Senate's version includes a repeal of Obamacare's individual mandate. Some holdouts actually say that they're worried the cuts will blow up the deficit. The Senate Finance Committee advancing the measure yesterday, despite those concerns, but tempers were running high. Listen.
I come from the poor people, and I've been here working my whole stinking career for people who don't have a chance. And I really resent anybody saying that I'm just doing this for the rich. Give me a break. I think you guys overplay that all the time, and it gets old. And frankly, you ought to quit it.
Mr. Chairman, the public
wait a minute.
believes it.
I'm not through.
Okay.
I get kind of sick and tired of it. True, it's a nice political play.
Well, Mr.
But
Chairman,
it's not true.
with all due respect, I get sick and tired of the richest people
Regular
in
order,
this country
Mr. Chairman.
getting richer and
Regular order.
richer.
Order.
We do a tax
Regular order.
middle class
Wait a minute,
Regular order.
and over and over again.
Wait just
How many
a second.
times do we do this before we learn this?
Well, joining me now is Rachel Bade, congressional reporter for Politico. First of all, your reaction to that vicious Hatch-Brown exchange tempers quite flared up over this debate.
Yeah, it's interesting you ask, because on Capitol Hill, Senator Orrin Hatch has this sort of reputation with everyone for being one of the sweetest men in the Senate. He writes poetry, he rarely raises his voice and gets mad, and when he does disagree, he does it very diplomatically. So this exchange really highlights just how incredibly how sensitive Republicans are to this argument that their tax bill is going for the rich. And that's because something like that could really hurt momentum for them if the public really believed that. The truth is sort of, somewhere in the middle. Yes, the rich are going to have some benefits on there, but the nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation has also said the middle class is going to see a boost here. The matter, or the problem here, is that the tax cuts for the middle class are going to expire in about 5 years. So that's an issue, because a lot of times some other people, maybe at the top 1%, are going to see their taxes continue to come down when people see their taxes go up again in a few years.
To be fair, regarding Brown's attack on Hatch, I mean, Orrin Hatch does not come from a wealthy background. He doesn't even come from, I would say, an upper middle class, more of a poor background, and he highlighted that. So sort of barking up the wrong tree there when you're talking to Orrin Hatch, who comes from a very modest background. But I want to throw up a Quinnipiac poll regarding the GOP tax plan and how voters feel whether or not it favors the rich. 59%, an overwhelming majority, say yes. Now, the bill has a lot of issues. Obviously, it's going to decrease the taxes for many, but the argument that both Republicans and Democrats are having is that it could potentially increase the tax for those in this country that, quite frankly, cannot afford a tax increase.
It all depends on how you do your taxes. If you do take a lot of deductions and credits, it's very possible that you could be a middle class person, say living in New York, New Jersey, California, even across, the Midwest, and see your taxes go up. For instance, in the House, they get rid of the medical deduction expenses. So if you have health issues and you deduct your expenses there, that could potentially be gone, and you could see a tax hike on there. If you have student loans that you deduct, you could potentially see a tax hike there. It all depends on how you do your taxes. But overall, the JCT has said the middle class, on average, will see a tax cut for a while.
There's an increase in the child tax credit. You will see an abolishment of the estate tax by 2025. There are a lot of perks to this plan as well. But I want to move on to another topic, because we also got a lot of new revelations related to the Russian meddling in the election. The Wall Street Journal reporting that special counsel Robert Mueller, who is actually looking into Russian meddling, has issued a slew of subpoenas for information from the Trump campaign. And in a separate story, the U.S. Senate wants additional phone records and other data from Jared Kushner, who they say has withheld or omitted information about his contacts with WikiLeaks and Russia. What are you hearing about this?
So it's pretty clear from what we're seeing that investigators at both the FBI and Capitol Hill feel like they're not getting everything they need in terms of their investigation. So first we hear from Senate Judiciary Committee, which had requested all Russia-related documents from top campaign officials, that they think Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, had an email that he did not give them regarding something about a backdoor meeting with Russia and a dinner. And they put out this release saying, we need this email. Where is this email, and why have you not given it to me? Similarly, this morning, we're learning that Mueller had issued subpoenas to about a dozen Trump campaign officials. And it's interesting because the Trump campaign had been voluntarily cooperating with the FBI. So some people might say this is surprising that they're getting a subpoena now. However, it just indicates that they feel like perhaps the campaign is not giving everything that they should be to the FBI. So by doing a subpoena, it basically compels them legally to not withhold anything.
All right, Rachel Bade, thank you very much, congressional reporter for Politico. Appreciate you coming on. Eric?
Yeah.
Oh, Julie, from Hollywood to Congress, claims of sexual harassment, well, they're exploding. A transgender actress now saying that actor Jeffrey Tambor pressed his body against hers in a sexually aggressive manner. She claims it happened during the filming of their show Transparent. Amazon says it is investigating that claim, and a similar one also made by Tambor's assistant. He denies those allegations. Meanwhile, actor Sylvester Stallone, well, he's also denying a report, claiming he had inappropriate sexual contact with a 16-year-old girl. The Daily Mail alleges it happened in Las Vegas in a hotel room there in 1986. Also, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell saying the Ethics Committee will investigate that latest investigation against Minnesota Senator Al Franken. You know, a California radio host accusing Franken of kissing and groping her during that trip in 2006. Franken has issued an apology and says that he will cooperate with the investigation. Meanwhile, the number now up to 9 women who accuse Roy Moore of sexual misconduct or harassment in Alabama. Still, the Alabama Republican Party is standing by the GOP Senate candidate today. He continues to deny those growing allegations. The Senate leadership promising an ethics investigation if Moore does win his seat on December 12th. Peter Ducey is following all this from Birmingham this morning. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Eric. Today, Judge Moore is continuing a campaign of trying to discredit his accusers, particularly the one who says that he signed a yearbook for her when she was in high school and he was in his 30s. This tweet just went out from Judge Moore. It says, "Good morning, Alabama. Day 3 of New York attorney Gloria Allred's refusal to turn over her fake yearbook for third-party examination. Hashtag Alabama Senate." The latest Fox News poll shows Moore down by 8 points to the Democrat Doug Jones, with 9% saying they either support somebody else or they're not sure. But despite all the national Republican pressure on Moore to step aside, in a Fox News poll of people who believe the Moore allegations and people who don't, 54% say he should stay in the race, and that includes 75% of Republicans who want the judge, who will be on the ballot no matter what, to stay put. So Moore continues to run the anti-establishment campaign that helped him win the GOP primary.
Many of you have recognized that this is an effort by Mitch McConnell and his cronies to steal this election from the people of Alabama, and they will not stand for it. They overcame $30 million and voted me in the primary, and now they're trying a different tactic. They even, the other day we got a call from one big magazine that you all recognize if I say the name. I don't want to say it. But they got a call and said, asked me to step down from the campaign. Well, I want to tell you who needs to step down. That's Mitch McConnell.
The Democrat Doug Jones has been rising in the polls, but he hasn't really been raising his public profile. He's averaging about an event a day, keeping the spotlight instead on the Moore controversy as it plays out. And just a few minutes from right now, Judge Moore's wife, Kayla, is going to be the headliner at a Women for More event in Montgomery. The whole point of this public show of support is to highlight what Kayla Moore and a handful of other women from across the state of Alabama say is Judge Moore's upstanding character. Eric.
Well, the Moores are fighting back clearly, and it seems like he's staying put. Peter, thank you. Julie?
Sexual harassment scandals dominating the headlines over the last several weeks. And when we come back, we're going to take a look at the media coverage of this explosive issue. Next. There's sexual harassment scandals constantly in the headlines. Republican Senate candidate Roy Moore and now Democratic Senator Al Franken. President Trump has remained silent on Moore. However, he does have a lot to say about Franken on Twitter. Here's one. The Al Frankenstein picture is really bad, speaks 1,000 words. Where do his hands go in pictures 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 while she sleeps? And to think that just last week, he was lecturing anyone who would listen about sexual harassment and respect for women. Leslie Stahl tape, referring to a sketch writing session at the SNL in the 1990s. Joining us now, Chris Deaton, Deputy Online Editor of the Weekly Standard, and Katie Glick, Senior Political Correspondent, McClatchy Newspapers. Okay, so there is a lot for the president to be calling out these days, and it's not just Republicans, it's Democrats, it's both. First, Chris, I'll ask you. He has obviously called out Al Franken's misdeeds, his alleged misdeeds. The question is he going to use his clout to help maybe resolve the mess going on in Alabama right now with Roy Moore?
Well, that seems awfully doubtful to me, just given the way the White House has played it so far. I believe Kellyanne Conway said either earlier today or maybe it was last night, with respect to why he would have weighed in on Franken the way that he did. Essentially, well, the Franken story is new, and he commented on the Moore story when he was on his Asia trip, and that broke 8 days ago. Leaving aside the fact that it's not exactly accurate, the Moore story continues to develop, in fact, and the fact that the campaign has not put the issue to rest. Naturally, the media is going to continue to ask questions about it. I think it provides some pretty good insight as to the way the White House is going to play this.
Okay, but Katie, let's not forget, President Trump originally did support Luther Strange in the special election, while Steve Bannon backed Moore. And so far, President Trump has refused to comment on Moore, but you have to understand that politics are going to play a role here. I mean, maybe he's waiting for perhaps the local GOP in Alabama to come up with another candidate. Could that be the reason why President Trump is trying to stay out of this? Because a lot is riding on the GOP not to screw it up in Alabama.
Well, it seems unlikely at this point that the Alabama Republican Party has really much of an appetite to look for a different candidate. We've seen conversations unfold in Alabama at the highest levels of the state party there this week, and there have been meetings there, and ultimately the result has been that many of the leaders there who are actually in a position to change the election should they choose to do so are going to plan to keep it on December 12th. And so at this point, it does get more challenging to see sort of the ways that Washington might be able to pressure anything other than Roy Moore being on that ballot and that ballot being taken next month.
Roy Moore not only vehemently denies these accusations, he is going full steam ahead. He refuses to drop out despite national GOP lawmakers basically urging him to do so. Local GOP right now standing behind him. But he is taking, interestingly enough, a similar approach as the president's handling when it comes to fake news media, because his campaign website has actually added a form for people to report inappropriate news organization contact, meaning that the media obviously has given Moore's accusers a lot of coverage in the recent days. Chris, is he trying to shift the blame on the media for reporting on the accusers' claims?
I think there's a broader strategy of deflection here. I mean, you can talk about the media. You can talk about what he tweeted earlier today, I think just recently, about it being day 3 and Gloria Allred still has not produced this notebook that is in question about Bev Nelson, one of the accusers. So there's quite a bit of deflection going on. But certainly the media is definitely part of that. I mean, I think you look at the press conference of sorts that the faith leaders held in defense of Moore yesterday. It went on for about 70 or 80 minutes. And part of it was to extol the virtues of Moore being a godly man in his adult life, and that's not exactly the point of what this story has been. But the other part of that entire thing was essentially to castigate the media. We've seen quite a bit of that, and it is a pretty good foil for a lot of voters. It worked for President Trump to a large extent, and we'll see if it works for Roy Moore down in Alabama.
All right. Okay, Katie Glick, thank you very much. Chris Deaton, thank you both.
Thank you.
Eric.
Oh, Julie, there is still a lot more ahead on happening now. The Senate tax plan, giving breaks to private jet owners. The new measure is swirling in controversy this morning. Meanwhile, Puerto Rico continues to be suffering from the devastation of Hurricane Maria, where thousands who have fled to the island are now ending up.
Companies who manage private jets could be getting a tax break. That is right. If you're rich and you have a private jet, you're going to get a break. It's one of the measures in the Senate's tax reform plan, which passed the Finance Committee last night. The break is under measure under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It exempts jet owners from paying taxes on things related to upkeep and maintenance. So on your PJ, you get a little discount.
My PJ?
I mean, that's what I used to always dream of, someday having a PJ. That dream did not actually ever happen. The
Are they
PJ.
serious? Really, seriously?
No, they are serious.
They're not going to let you deduct the mortgage, and there's a whole slew of other things they're not going to let you do. But you can on your Gulfstream. On your
I don't
G2.
know if that's going to make it. I mean, that's not going to make it. This is just a pipe dream for maybe a couple wealthy
a few of those guys down there.
lawmakers.
And you know who you are. You got the private jet over at Teterboro. All right.
Yeah, that's pretty embarrassing.
All right. Well, it's been almost 2 months since Hurricane Maria devastated the island of Puerto Rico. Residents still there, many of them do not have access to clean water. Schools and businesses sadly remain closed. Meanwhile, electricity continues to be the most overwhelming of the issues. 57% of the island still remains without power. Repair crews estimate that 75%, though, will have power, but not until the end of January. And as a result, more than 160,000 people have left the island since that hurricane. And you know where they're going? They're going to Florida, especially the Central Coast. Steve Harrigan live in one major destination, which happens to be Orlando. Hi, Steve.
Eric, they are coming to Florida by the thousands each week, more and more. Florida officials say more than 160,000 now have arrived here in the state since the storm, settling around the Orlando area, and they've set up a one-stop shopping point in Orlando International Airport to try and get people the help they need: food, shelter, clothing. Many of the people we've talked to really arriving with just nothing. We spoke to a farmer who said back on the island he simply can't do his job.
I'm kind of stuck in the air. I mean, you know, I produce hydroponically as well. So without light, water issues, I can't even really produce.
That's a farmer who doesn't have light or water, the basics to grow food in Puerto Rico. He said he had 2 pairs of pants and 1 shirt. That's it. Left everything else behind. And of course, the influx of tens of thousands is putting a strain on some communities here. Osceola County has now 2,500 new students. The superintendent says that is simply a massive amount to handle. She said on a typical day, they might have 70 brand new students who simply show up at the door, often not speaking English and not with any transcripts. Here's what she had to say.
And it's adding like 2 elementary schools to our population that we were unable to plan for and project.
Suddenly 2 brand new schools to deal with, and those schools are expensive as well. $28,000 per student. That's a $70 million unbudgeted expense. The county is asking for help from the state and federal agencies. Eric, back to you.
All right, Steve, it's still such a struggle for the people who are on the island. Thank you. Julie?
The victims of a devastating earthquake being offered help from an unlikely source. How basically Iran and Iraq is actually reaching out, and how those 2 countries responded to the offer. It'll be a surprise. You'll have to wait to see. Also in the Middle East, a potentially major shakeup in Saudi Arabia. Could a new king be taking the throne? And supporters of Roy Moore about to speak out as we await their remarks in Birmingham. Keep it here. We're going to bring them to you as soon as they happen live.
These are seeing the last though, but I don't really.
The King of Saudi Arabia is reportedly stepping down. An unconfirmed report claims his 32-year-old son could take the throne next week. It comes at a time of escalating tension between Saudi Arabia and several other countries in the region after Lebanon's prime minister announced his departure from Riyadh. Rich Edson joins us now from the State Department with more. Hi, Rich.
Yeah, good morning, Julie. And what we do know is that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, the next in line to the Saudi throne, is strengthening and consolidating his position. There have been arrests of a number of billionaires, princes, and government officials in what he has described as an anti-corruption probe. Regional reports say the Saudi government is now letting some of these officials buy their freedom, surrendering assets in exchange for their release. The government arrested more than 200 in this anti-corruption campaign, locking them in the Ritz-Carlton in Riyadh. The State Department says the Saudis should pursue this effort legally and transparently. Now, the Saudi government is also pushing a more aggressive international posture, particularly with its proxy fight against Iran. That takes us to Lebanon, where the Saudi-backed Prime Minister of Lebanon resigned earlier this month from Saudi Arabia, claiming overwhelming influence from Iran-backed Hezbollah in that country. Saeed Hariri says he is now returning to Lebanon to officially resign, and says he did so because of Iran-backed interference in the region.
I wanted to cause a positive shock for the Lebanese in order to know what a dangerous place we were in, because we cannot continue in that way. That we say we are distancing Lebanon from regional conflicts, while we found Lebanese parties in Yemen and other places as building up relations with the Syrian regime, which I will not conduct.
Hariri is expected to arrive in France first before returning to Lebanon to resign. This is a backdrop, this proxy fight between Iran and Saudi Arabia for so many places across the Middle East. It includes Lebanon and fighting in Syria and in Yemen. Julie.
Rich Hudson, thank you.
A helping hand for the victims of the massive earthquake in Iran from an unexpected source. Israel. You know, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is offering his country's assistance to Tehran and also to Iraq, despite Iran's belligerent stance and hatred of the Jewish state, even amid warnings that Iran is expanding in the region at the expense of Israel, the U.S., and our Arab allies. For more on this, let's go to Jerusalem and talk to David Keyes. He is Prime Minister Netanyahu's spokesman, who joins us from there right now. David, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Sadly and tragically, the death toll is 500, at least, and climbing in Iran. And considering what they've said about your country, why would your government make this offer?
Well, the Prime Minister made this offer because he saw the horrendous pictures of mothers and fathers searching for their children amidst the rubble. Absolutely devastating images. Israel has sent humanitarian assistance and medical aid around the world to Haiti and to Mexico City, to the Philippines. Iran is a lot closer than those places, and Israel's humanitarian desire to aid the people of the region, not the regime, but the people, is what animated this decision. Of course, it surprised a lot of people because the regime has said many times that it wants to destroy Israel. It engraves missiles with the phrase Israel will be wiped off the map. But there's a big difference between the regime and the people. The regime is cruel and expansionist. The regime supports terror, and the people are the primary victims of the regime.
Well, the International Red Cross has said, you know, they don't want any help. But you're right. You pointed the fact that they recently tested missiles that said Israel must be wiped out. They've talked about wiping Israel off the map. They've called Israel the blood-sucking Zionist regime, and then they're still chanting death to America. Let me play you a bit of what the Prime Minister said in terms of this offer.
Israel has no quarrel with the people of Iran. We never have. Our only quarrel is with the cruel Iranian regime, a regime that holds its people hostage, a regime that threatens our people with annihilation.
And meanwhile, Rouhani, the president of Iran, is getting a lot of criticism internally because of the reaction of his government and the continued death toll and the building codes even there.
Well, the Prime Minister has made several overtures to the Iranian people. He's spoken directly to them. In fact, he spoke in Farsi directly to the Iranian people. And following our aid, our offer for humanitarian aid, for medical assistance, we got an absolutely overwhelming response from Iranians, thanking the Prime Minister, thanking Israel for standing in solidarity with him, and frankly for helping speak the truth about the Iranian regime. You mentioned some of the regime's desires. I mean, they call America the great Satan. They call Israel the little Satan. No offense to Europe, but they're only a mid-sized Satan. They're hanging gays from cranes in town squares. They're supporting terrorism all throughout the Middle East. And I think the fact that the vast majority of the Arab world and Israel see this threat in the exact same way should cause a lot of people to have their ears perk up and understand the threat that is against all of us.
And do you think reaching out to the citizens, the people of Iran, do you think this could start to potentially help ease any of the tensions or at least cause a resistance against the regime?
I think what it can do is highlight the tremendous gulf between the regime and the people. As I said before, the regime speaks absolutely viciously against Israel. It seeks to destroy Israel. It seeks to sow mayhem and terror throughout the Middle East. The regime is treating its own people brutally, jailing opposition, torturing journalists. And yet the people are good, and I think they want better relations with the West. I think they would like better relations with America. I think they'd like better relations with Israel. So this is part of our strategy, to speak directly to the people instead of this extremely cruel, extremely theocratic, extremely dictatorial, terrorist sponsoring and supporting regime.
And finally, at the same time, they are expanding the Shia Crescent, you know, from Tehran right on through with Yemen and into Lebanon, moving into Syria, for example, and with Hezbollah. What are your concerns, and how does Israel and the U.S., what should the Trump administration do to try and fight back against Iranian expansion?
Well, I think it took a great first step in decertifying this very flawed nuclear deal, which actually empowered Iran, which encouraged it to expand its aggression throughout the region. Iran is trying to establish a foothold in Syria. It's trying to take over Lebanon. It's supporting terrorist organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah. So its aims are clear. Its aims are not just directed at Israel, but actually at the entire world. and specifically the entire Middle East. I mean, everyone understands the threat of North Korea today, and yet Iran's GDP is 30 times that of North Korea. So you can imagine if Iran is acting this way without nuclear weapons, why it's so important to stop their quest to attain nuclear weapons. And what this very flawed deal does is actually increase the chances that within just a few years, not by violating the deal, but by keeping the deal, Iran can walk into the capacity to enrich enough uranium for hundreds of nuclear weapons. That's bad for Iranians, that's bad for Israel, that's bad for the Middle East, that's bad for the entire world.
Yeah, the critics say that gives them the green light, basically, under this deal in about 8 years to go for that. David Keyes, thank you, and thank you for speaking to us about the Iranian challenge. It is the challenge that we all face. Julie?
The Keystone Pipeline springing a massive leak in South Dakota, spilling an estimated 210,000 gallons of oil. State officials say there is no sign any surface bodies of water or drinking water systems have been compromised. But emergency crews nonetheless working to clean up the spill as quickly as possible, shutting down the pipeline while fixing the leak. Officials are still trying to determine exactly how this happened.
Well, you know, as predicted, premiums are going up. Insurance companies blaming President Trump. Where Republicans say rate hikes were going to spike long before Mr. Trump took office. And the House, you know, passing its version of the tax reform bill. Well, now it's the Senate term. Coming up, how can this affect your money and your taxes as lawmakers vow to get the deal done before the year is up?
I look forward, and all of us in this room look forward to working with President Trump in the Senate to get this bill to the President's desk by the end of the year.
I got an offer for my house online.
We've been talking about the tax reform bill. The House approving its measure yesterday. And now the race is on to the Senate to push across its own version through the finish line. So what will the GOP tax plan mean for you? Well, let's take a look at a breakdown for a second of what the House passed tax bill includes. It cuts corporate taxes dramatically from 35% to 20%, repeals the alternative minimum tax, the AMT. It increases the child tax credit, and it cuts deductions for state and local taxes, college loans, and medical expenses. A lot of controversy about that. So let's talk more about this. Joseph Perry joins us. He's a Markham Tax and Business Services leader. Richard Fowler, radio talk show host and Fox News contributor. Welcome to you both. Joseph, let me start with you. You know, they say that they're predicting that taxes for many in the middle class were told are going to be cut. But in 10 years, the middle class could get slammed. So is this plan really a benefit?
Well, I think if you take a look at the overall bill as to what they were trying to achieve, simplification, a corporate tax reduction, and a cut for the middle class, I think those bills, both in the House and the Senate, combined, achieve those. And I would say that, you know, most Americans will be getting a tax cut and have simplification, especially for the middle class and lower.
But then in 10 years, if you're like $75,000 or less, you know, your taxes will go up in 10 years, Joseph.
Right, but I guess you could say that 10 years ago, where we are, we wouldn't have had the rates that we had before. So 10 years is a long time in political life. So I think that we have to look at a bill that's going to help stimulate the economy for the short term and then see what the consequences are. We could always make modifications as time goes on.
Richard, what about that?
Modifications as time goes on is not something doesn't sound like tax reform to me, Eric. Tax reform means you really look at our tax code deeply and you work really hard to try to make it work for every American, whether you're rich or you're poor. When Ronald Reagan did this in the 80s, it took Democrats and Republicans working together almost a year to get it done. We are trying to get this done in, 2.5 weeks? We're trying to ramrod this through the United States Congress, and what you're seeing is the American people aren't liking it. Every poll you look at shows how unpopular this tax bill is, and there's a couple reasons why. Number one, it explodes the deficit by $1.5 trillion. Number two, like you said, Eric, for middle-class earners, a couple years from now, your taxes are going to go up because the middle-class tax cuts that are in this bill aren't permanent, while the tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires are permanent, as well
Joseph
as many
said
of the loopholes.
They could change that. Joseph just said they could address that.
Of course they could change that, but in the meantime, while they're working on changing it, folks, middle-class single mothers who make less than $75,000 a year are going to be trying to figure out how to make ends meet.
You know, Joseph, you also have some other issues that are concerning. You can't, the deduction for extraordinary medical expenses, that's out. Deductions for interest on student loans, that's out. And then you got something that really hits the blue states. No more deductions on the state and local taxes.
Yeah, well, I think if you take a look at it, the deductions for the state and local taxes probably have the serious consequences. I know many of our clients are actually doing scenarios to see, does it make sense to be in California and Florida, or do we move to Floridas that don't have states that don't have high tax states such as Florida or Texas. So I think that think about the consequences economically if large companies move out of New York state and city. Those ancillary jobs that it helps to feed will no longer exist.
But is there anything in there that can mitigate that?
Well, I think originally the lower rate of 35% equated to not having the state tax deduction. You take away the AMT, that's simplification, and that really does help the middle class and lower and a lower class below that. But I think overall, it really is to help stimulate the economy. If you take a look, most people that have jobs, they want to increase their wages. This is to hopefully help increase wages and allow for stimulated growth. I know my clients, when they look to spend money, they're more apt to spend money when they know they have more money in their pocket.
Yeah, Richard, what about that? Let me just play Treasury Secretary Mnuchin a little earlier this morning in America's Newsroom. That's exactly what he said. Here he is.
For most Americans, the vast number of Americans that don't have high tax states, it's not fair that they're subsidizing a few states. So again, the people's taxes who are going to go up are the rich people in high tax states.
Well, there's Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, Richard.
Yeah, they're basically telling you that taxes are going to go up for a lot of Americans because a lot of folks live in high-tax states like California, Illinois, Maryland, New York. But let's be very clear here. What this bill does is it keeps a lot of the loopholes that are in place, like, for example, loopholes for corporate jet owners, loopholes for people who own yachts. So millionaires and billionaires and corporations will benefit from this tax plans. There's no if or buts about it. But middle-class, working-class families, Republicans have yet to show how they'll benefit from this tax plan. If you are a young person watching the show and you went to a university and you have a student loan, you will not benefit from this tax plan because you can no longer write off your student loan deductions. If you are a person that's trying to buy a home, you will no longer benefit from this tax plan because you can no longer write that off. If you are a teacher who buys supplies for your classroom, right, you will not benefit from this tax plan because you can no longer get the tax credit that was once in the law for you. So let's be very clear about who this tax law supports and who it doesn't.
Yeah, all right. Joseph, sorry to stop you there. We're up against the clock, but that is the debate. Exactly. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Julie?
Next, another piece of President Obama's legacy. President Trump reversing a ban on importing elephant trophies. The move is getting its fair share of criticism. Plus, insurance premiums on the Obamacare exchanges going up again. Some are pointing fingers at the president. President Trump? As Obamacare premiums jump across the country, 20 Democratic insurance commissioners are turning the tables. They're now actually blaming President Trump for at least part of the increases. What is this about? Dan Springer is live in Seattle with the details. It is called Obamacare, right, Dan, still?
I think it's called the political blame game, Julie. Yeah, you're right. It's a stunning reversal, really, because for years we've gotten used to Democrats going on defense every time Obamacare premiums go up. But now, as you mentioned, they are going on the offensive, and they are blaming President Trump, even though, of course, it's called Obamacare. It's open enrollment time, and people shopping in the individual market are finding higher premiums. According to the Kaiser Foundation, gold and bronze plans are up on average 18%. Premiums for silver plans have increased 32%. And there is no doubt that some of that is due to President Trump eliminating the cost-sharing subsidies. Those were direct payments to insurance companies to defray some of the cost of their coverage, really an incentive to offer plans on the exchange. Now, after months of a failed effort to get Congress to repeal Obamacare, Trump ended the cost-sharing subsidy. When premiums went up, Democrats pounced.
All of the negative things that the Trump administration has said since he came into office has affected the market overall. It's made it unstable and created a lot of uncertainty. And that's something that health insurers don't like.
But Republicans point out correctly that premiums have climbed every year of Obamacare, and last year the average increase was 25%, long before President Trump took office. As for the subsidies he cut, well, they were ruled by a federal judge to be illegal because Congress never appropriated the money.
The only people that should be blamed for Obamacare's high premiums over the last 4 or 5 years are the Democrats who drafted Obamacare, passed Obamacare, and voted for Obamacare.
And lost in all the finger pointing, Julie, is the fact that tax credits have also gone up. So 80% of those people who are buying on the individual market are paying no more. And if you don't get subsidies, you can go into a gold or a bronze plan, and that'll be just fine for you economically. Julie?
All right, Dan Springer, thank you. Eric.
Well, Julie, still to come on Happening Now. It's a busy day in the Senate. We'll tell you about the pitfalls that could lay ahead as Republicans start rounding up votes for the tax reform. They're doing that in the Senate today. What a nice picture.